We already decided, your house will belong to us. My son said it so calmly that for a moment I thought I had misheard him. The words hung in the air above the dinner table, settling over the plates, the glasses, the untouched bowl of mashed potatoes I had made from scratch just a few hours earlier. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to smile, waiting for him to tell me it was some kind of misunderstanding. But he didn't smile. He didn't look embarrassed. He simply sat there with his hands folded on the table as though he had just commented on the weather. Rachel sat beside him. She lowered her eyes for a second, then lifted her wine glass and took a small sip. That was when I realized this conversation had happened before. Just not with me. I moved out without saying a word. At least, that's probably what they expected me to do eventually. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and let me know where you're watching from. I never imagined that after spending 35 years building a home, raising a son, and standing beside my husband through every challenge life threw at us, I would one day sit at my own dining room table and be told that my future had already been decided by someone else. The house around us felt different that evening. Maybe it was because Thomas had been gone for 6 weeks. Maybe it was because grief changes the shape of every room. Or maybe it was because I was finally beginning to see things I had ignored for years. The dining room had always been my favorite part of the house. The oak table sat beneath a brass chandelier Thomas installed himself nearly 20 years earlier. Family photographs lined the walls. Vacation pictures. Christmas mornings. School graduations. Smiling faces frozen in time. Looking at them now felt strange. Almost like I was staring at another family's memories instead of my own. Daniel reached for his water glass. He was 43 years old now. Taller than his father had been. His hair had begun turning gray around the temples. Sometimes when I looked at him, I still saw the little boy who used to race down these hallways wearing superhero pajamas. The little boy who cried when he scraped his knee and insisted I sit beside him until he fell asleep. That boy felt very far away tonight. "Mom," he said softly, almost as if he was trying to sound reasonable. "You know this house is too much for one person." I stared at him. "Too much?" I asked. "It's 4 bedrooms," Rachel added. "You don't even use half of it." Her voice was gentle. Polite. That somehow made it worse. There was something unsettling about hearing people discuss your life like a business proposal. "This is my home," I said quietly. "I know every room in this house." Daniel sighed. "We're just trying to think ahead." Think ahead. I had heard that phrase several times recently. Rachel used it. Daniel used it. Every time they said it, I felt like there was something hidden underneath the words. Something they weren't saying out loud. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times. The sound echoed through the house. For a moment, nobody spoke. I found myself glancing toward the empty chair at the end of the table. Thomas's chair. The chair nobody had sat in since the funeral. He would have known what to say. Thomas always knew when something wasn't right. He could read people in a way I never could. I remembered the last conversation we had in this room. It was a quiet Sunday evening. We were drinking coffee after dinner. He had looked around the house and smiled. "This place will always belong to you, Maggie," he had said. "Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel like a guest here." At the time, I laughed and told him he was being dramatic. Now those words returned to me with unsettling clarity. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly. "We're only trying to help," he said. Rachel nodded. "You deserve a simpler life." Simpler life. Another phrase I had been hearing lately. It sounded thoughtful. Caring even. Yet every time they said it, I felt smaller somehow. Like they were slowly moving me toward a future I hadn't chosen. Outside, the evening sun was fading behind the maple trees in the backyard. The same trees Thomas planted when Daniel was 10 years old. I could see their shadows stretching across the lawn through the dining room window. Everything looked peaceful. Normal. But something deep inside me felt unsettled. I couldn't explain it then. I only knew that my son wasn't asking for my opinion. He wasn't discussing possibilities. He wasn't wondering what I wanted. He was informing me of a decision that had already been made. "We already decided," he had said. "We." Not me. Not us as a family. Them. Daniel and Rachel. Somewhere along the way, they had stopped seeing me as the owner of this house. And for the first time, I wondered how long they had been making plans behind my back. That night, after they left, I stood alone in the kitchen washing dishes. The house was silent except for the sound of running water. One plate, one fork, one glass. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window above the sink. 71 years old. A widow. Alone. Yet as I looked at that reflection, something unexpected began replacing the sadness I had carried since Thomas passed away. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something quieter. Something colder. A question. And once that question entered my mind, I couldn't stop thinking about it. If my son felt confident enough to tell me my house already belonged to him, what exactly had he been planning all this time? The next morning, I woke before sunrise, just as I had every day for the past 35 years. For a few seconds, lying in bed, I forgot everything. Then I looked toward the empty side of the room and remembered. Thomas was gone. Daniel's words returned almost immediately afterward. I pulled myself out of bed and walked downstairs. The house felt unusually quiet. Not peaceful. Hollow. I started a pot of coffee and stood by the kitchen window while it brewed. The backyard was covered in a thin layer of morning dew. The maple trees swayed gently in the breeze. Thomas had planted them with Daniel all those years ago. I could still picture the two of them digging holes in the yard, arguing over where each tree should go. Back then, this house felt like the center of our family. Now it felt like something everyone wanted for themselves. I carried my coffee into the living room and sat in Thomas's old recliner. The chair still leaned slightly to the left because he never bothered fixing it. The sight brought a faint smile to my face. That smile disappeared when I noticed something strange. A small stack of papers sat on the side table near the front window. I did not remember leaving them there. Curious, I picked them up. They were real estate brochures. Several pages were folded at the corners. One advertisement showed a senior living community about 20 miles away. Another displayed a small condominium complex on the edge of town. I stared at the papers for a long moment. Then I remembered Rachel carrying a tote bag into the house 2 weeks earlier. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now I wondered if she had left these behind intentionally. Not to inform me. To influence me. I placed the brochures back on the table and tried to dismiss the thought. But once suspicion enters your mind, ordinary things begin looking different. Over the next few days, I started noticing details I had previously ignored. Daniel called more often than usual, but he rarely asked how I was doing. Instead, he asked questions about the house. Had I considered downsizing? Was I keeping up with maintenance? Had I thought about future expenses? Rachel was even more direct. She would stop by with coffee or pastries and somehow steer every conversation toward property taxes, insurance costs, or home repairs. One afternoon, she stood in the kitchen looking around as if she were evaluating a property listing. "It really is a beautiful place," she said. "A young family could do so much with it." I said nothing. She smiled awkwardly and changed the subject. Later that evening, I walked through the house room by room. I wanted to see it through my own eyes instead of theirs. The guest bedroom still contained the quilt my mother had sewn decades ago. The hallway walls displayed photographs from family vacations. The den held hundreds of books Thomas collected throughout his life. Every room carried memories. Every corner told a story. Yet Daniel and Rachel seemed to see only square footage and market value. 3 days later, another small incident unsettled me. I returned from the grocery store carrying 2 bags and noticed a vehicle parked across the street. It belonged to Daniel. He was not supposed to visit that day. As I walked toward the front door, I saw him emerge from the garage. He looked surprised to see me. "Mom," he said quickly. "I was just checking on a few things." I glanced toward the garage. "What things?" His expression tightened for a second. "Nothing important. I just wanted to make sure everything looked okay." He smiled, but it felt forced. That evening, after he left, I walked into the garage myself. Everything appeared normal at first. Then I noticed something that made me stop. One of the spare key hooks on the wall was empty. The hook had held an extra house key for years. I searched the nearby shelf, the workbench, the storage cabinet. Nothing. The key was gone. Maybe Thomas had moved it months ago. Maybe Daniel borrowed it and forgot to mention it. There were plenty of innocent explanations. Yet the uneasy feeling remained. I stood there in the fading light, staring at the empty hook. It was such a small thing. A missing key. An ordinary detail. But somehow it felt important. Because for the first time, I began to wonder whether the plans being made around me had started long before that dinner conversation. And if they had, I needed to find out exactly how far those plans went. The missing key stayed on my mind for days. Not because of the key itself, but because of what it represented. Trust is a strange thing. You rarely notice it when it is there. You only notice it once it starts disappearing. The following week, I began paying closer attention to the people around me. I stopped filling the silence with explanations and excuses. Instead, I listened. Daniel called every evening. The conversations felt increasingly rehearsed. He would ask about my day, wait politely for my answer, and then somehow steer the discussion back toward the house. One night, he asked whether I had considered replacing the roof before winter. Another night, he mentioned rising property taxes. Then he brought up home insurance rates. Every subject seemed connected to the same destination. Rachel was becoming more comfortable as well. She no longer hid her curiosity about the property. During one visit, she walked through the dining room and paused beside the front window. "The natural light in here is amazing," she said. "If someone updated the flooring, this room could look completely different." I looked at her. She immediately smiled. I am just thinking out loud. Perhaps she was. Yet the words lingered with me long after she left. A few days later, I attended my weekly church group. It was the first time I had gone in nearly 2 months. Grief had kept me away. Several friends greeted me warmly. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to normal. After the meeting ended, I lingered in the parking lot talking with Grace Miller. Grace and I had known each other for over 30 years. She had attended my wedding anniversary parties, my son's graduation, even Thomas's funeral. She knew my family almost as well as I did. As we stood beside her car, she hesitated. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" she said carefully. "Of course." She looked uncomfortable. "Are you planning to move?" The question caught me off guard. "Move where?" Grace frowned. "I thought maybe you had already made arrangements." My stomach tightened. "Why would you think that?" She shifted uneasily. "Rachel mentioned something a few weeks ago. We ran into each other at the grocery store. She said you were looking at senior communities and considering your next chapter." I stared at her. The words felt distant, almost unreal. I never told Rachel any such thing. Grace's expression changed immediately. Concern replaced confusion. Oh, that single word told me everything. She had not expected that answer. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Cars rolled through the parking lot. A cool breeze rustled the nearby trees. Finally, Grace lowered her voice. "Margaret, I probably should not say this, but something felt odd about that conversation." Rachel seemed very certain. Almost excited. I forced a small smile and thanked her. Then I drove home with my thoughts racing. That evening I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Rachel had told people I was planning to leave. Not that I might leave. Not that I was considering options. She spoke as though it were already decided. The realization unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo album. Inside were pictures from decades earlier. There was Daniel at age 6 holding a fishing rod beside Thomas. There was our family standing in front of the house shortly after we bought it. We looked exhausted and happy at the same time. Back then, every improvement had required sacrifice. Extra shifts. Delayed vacations. Careful budgeting. Thomas and I built our lives one paycheck at a time. Looking through those photographs reminded me of something important. This house was never simply real estate. It was the physical record of a lifetime. Every wall carried memories. Every room represented years of effort. Near midnight, I closed the album and prepared for bed. As I passed through the hallway, I noticed a faint light beneath the door of Thomas's old study. The room had remained mostly untouched since his passing. Curious, I stepped inside and switched on the lamp. Everything appeared exactly as it always had. his desk, his bookshelves, his reading glasses resting beside a stack of notebooks. Yet something immediately felt different. I could not explain why. Slowly I approached the desk. One drawer was not fully closed. That alone was unusual. Thomas had been meticulous about organization. I pulled the drawer open and looked inside. Several folders sat neatly arranged. Most contained financial records and household documents. Then I noticed a plain white envelope tucked beneath a ledger book. There was no postage, no address. Just 2 words written across the front in Thomas's familiar handwriting. For Margaret. My hand froze. The room suddenly felt very still. I stared at the envelope for several seconds without touching it. Somehow I knew this was not something he intended me to find right away. Yet for reasons I could not explain, I felt certain that whatever was inside might answer questions I had only recently begun asking. For several minutes I simply stood there holding the envelope. The house was silent around me. Somewhere in the distance I could hear the grandfather clock marking another hour, but the sound seemed far away. My eyes remained fixed on Thomas's handwriting. He had always written carefully, every letter neat and deliberate. Seeing those familiar words felt like hearing his voice again after weeks of silence. I sat down in his chair and slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter and a single photograph. The photograph showed our family standing in front of the house nearly 20 years earlier. Daniel was in his 20s. Rachel had not entered our lives yet. Thomas stood beside me with one arm around my shoulder. We looked happy. Not perfect. Just happy. I set the photograph aside and unfolded the letter. The date at the top immediately caught my attention. Thomas had written it less than a year before he passed away. My hands trembled slightly as I began reading. Margaret, if you are reading this, there is a chance I am no longer beside you. I hope that day is still far away. But if it has arrived, there are a few things I need you to remember. I stopped for a moment. Tears blurred my vision. I wiped them away and continued. First, this house belongs to you. Not because of legal documents. Not because of money. It belongs to you because you sacrificed for it every single day. Every wall in this place carries your work, your patience, and your love. Never allow anyone to convince you otherwise. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I continued reading. Second, if people begin making decisions for you instead of with you, pay attention. Good intentions do not fear conversation. Only hidden motives require silence. A chill ran through me. Thomas had always possessed an uncanny ability to understand people. Throughout our marriage, he noticed details others overlooked. Small changes in behavior. Unspoken tensions. Tiny warning signs that often proved important later. Suddenly memories began resurfacing. Moments that seemed insignificant at the time. Rachel asking unusual questions about property values during holiday dinners. Daniel becoming strangely interested in household expenses. Conversations that abruptly ended whenever I entered the room. At the time I dismissed them. Now they felt different. I looked back at the letter. Near the bottom, Thomas had written one final paragraph. There are documents that attorney Benjamin Carter is holding for safekeeping. If you ever feel uncertain about anything involving the house or family finances, speak with him before making any decisions. Promise me that. My heart began beating faster. Benjamin Carter. I had not spoken to him since shortly after the funeral. At the time we discussed routine matters and estate paperwork. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Yet Thomas clearly wanted me to remember his name. I carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. Then I sat quietly in the study for nearly an hour. Looking around the room felt different now. The shelves. The desk. The framed photographs. Everything suddenly seemed connected to a larger picture I had not fully understood. The next morning, I called Attorney Carter's office. His assistant answered and informed me that he was available later that week. I scheduled an appointment without mentioning the letter. For the first time in months, I felt something besides grief. Purpose. The days leading up to the meeting passed slowly. During that time, Daniel called twice. Rachel visited once. Their behavior remained unchanged, but my perspective had shifted. I found myself listening more carefully. Watching more closely. During Rachel's visit, she casually mentioned a senior living community located about 30 minutes away. The same community featured in one of the brochures I had found earlier. "I have heard wonderful things about that place," she said while stirring her coffee. "A lot of people your age seem very happy there." Your age. The phrase landed differently than she intended. I simply smiled and changed the subject. Later that evening, after she left, I walked through the house again. Not with sadness this time. With clarity. I paused in the kitchen where countless family meals had been prepared. I stood in the living room where Christmas mornings once filled the air with excitement. I ran my fingers along the banister Thomas installed himself decades earlier. Every part of the house reminded me of the same truth. This was not merely property. It was history. It was family. It was home. As I reached the top of the stairs, my eyes settled on the framed photograph hanging in the hallway. The same photograph that rested inside the envelope. Thomas looked directly into the camera, smiling confidently. For the first time since his passing, I felt as though he had left me more than memories. He had left me a warning. And, perhaps, if I was willing to follow it, a way to uncover the truth about what was really happening around me. The morning of my appointment arrived gray and cool. A light rain tapped against the windshield as I drove downtown toward Benjamin Carter's office. The building looked exactly as I remembered it. Red brick. Tall windows. A brass directory beside the entrance. Yet as I stepped through the front doors, I felt different from the woman who had walked in shortly after Thomas's funeral. Back then I was overwhelmed by grief. Today I carried questions. Benjamin greeted me personally. He was a man in his early 60s with silver hair and a calm demeanor that inspired confidence. After a few minutes of polite conversation, he noticed the envelope in my hands. "I assume there is a reason you wanted to meet," he said gently. I nodded and handed him Thomas's letter. He read it carefully. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Your husband anticipated that this conversation might happen one day." My pulse quickened. What exactly did he mean? Benjamin opened a drawer and removed a thick folder. It was labeled with our family name. He placed it on the desk between us. "Several years ago, Thomas instructed me to hold certain documents in confidence unless you requested them." I stared at the folder. Why would he do that? Benjamin's expression softened. "Because he loved you. And because he wanted to make sure you were protected." He opened the folder and began reviewing papers. Most of them were legal documents I had never seen before. Property records. Estate planning forms. Letters of instruction. The deeper we went, the clearer the picture became. Thomas had been meticulous. Every major asset had been carefully organized. Every ownership detail clearly documented. There was no ambiguity. No uncertainty. Then Benjamin slid one particular document across the desk. "This concerns the house." I looked down at the page. My eyes moved slowly across the legal language. Then I stopped. "Read it again." And then a third time. "This says..." My voice faded. Benjamin nodded. "Yes. The property was transferred entirely into your control years ago through a survivorship arrangement. Upon Thomas's passing, ownership became exclusively yours." I sat quietly. Relief washed over me, followed almost immediately by confusion. "Then why does Daniel act as though..." I stopped myself. Benjamin studied me carefully. "As though the house already belongs to him." I looked up sharply. He sighed. "Margaret, I have spent decades working with families. Grief often reveals things people have been thinking for a long time." The room fell silent. Outside, the rain continued tapping against the windows. Benjamin reached into the folder once more and removed another sheet of paper. "There is something else you should know." He slid the document toward me. It was a record of inquiries. Several months before Thomas passed away, someone had contacted the office asking questions about future property transfers and inheritance procedures. My eyes moved to the name listed on the inquiry. Daniel Collins. I felt my stomach tighten. "He called you?" Benjamin nodded. "Several times." "Did Thomas know?" "Yes." The answer came quietly. "Your husband was aware." I looked away, struggling to process the information. Benjamin continued carefully. Thomas never accused your son of bad intentions. But he became concerned by how frequently the questions focused on assets rather than responsibilities. I thought back to countless family dinners, casual conversations, small comments I had dismissed. Suddenly, they seemed less random, less innocent. Benjamin closed the folder. Margaret, nothing in these documents suggests your son has any claim over your home without your consent. None whatsoever. I nodded slowly. For the first time since this strange situation began, I felt solid ground beneath my feet. Yet another question remained. If Daniel knew none of this belonged to him, why was he behaving as though it already did? The answer arrived later that afternoon. After leaving the office, I stopped at a small cafe near the town square. I ordered coffee and chose a table by the window. As I sat there reviewing everything Benjamin had shown me, a familiar voice caught my attention. Rachel. She was seated 2 tables away speaking with a woman I recognized from her neighborhood book club. Neither of them noticed me. I was partially hidden behind a decorative partition. At first, I paid little attention. Then I heard Rachel laugh. Honestly, it is only a matter of time now, she said. The other woman smiled. Are you excited? Rachel nodded enthusiastically. Very. The house has so much potential. Daniel and I already have plans for the kitchen. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. The house. Not a house. The house. My house. Rachel continued speaking, completely unaware that I could hear every word. And with each sentence, a disturbing truth became harder and harder to ignore. Ko/Kong, Band of Viet Hoc Kung Cap Part 1 to 5 Qua Ka Chien Na Yi Trong Mot Kuok Tro Chien Kok Hok Trong Go Kan Kong Hien Tio Day, Va Noi Dung Du Kan Duok Teep Noi Chin Zak Kong. Ko/Kong, Part 6 Va Kak Fan Truok, Qua Ka Chien Nai Ko Nam Trong Ga Kan Hok Tai Lu Kong Hien Tio Day, Va Toi Kan Zem Noi Dung Du De Viet Teep Part 7 Dung Tuen Nan Bat, Boi Kan Ba Thoi John. I cannot reliably write Part 8 because Parts 1 to 7 are not visible in this conversation. Please paste Part 7 or Parts 6 to 7, and I will continue the story with consistent characters, setting, timeline, tone, and structure. I cannot write a coherent Part 9 that continues Part 8 because Parts 1 to 8 are not available in the visible conversation. Continuing without them would force me to invent characters, events, and timeline details, which would likely break continuity. Please provide Part 8 or a summary of Parts 1 to 8, and I can continue accurately.